facilitator. If you can move your teacher role over just for this discussion, it would be useful. So think of yourself if you were the coach of a Little League team, a coach of dancers, a facilitator of some kind of a group of people coming together. That's what I'd like you to think about. So the idea of working with a student who is deafblind requires us to be a bridge, not a barrier, to the world, the whole world for this student. And this means in part that you're helping to build as much independence as possible, curiosity of the child about things, places, and people. Also facilitating social interactions, especially with peers, and expanding communication interactions with others. But before we go, I want you to keep something in mind. A typical hearing child with vision and hearing, a child with typical vision and hearing, really incidental learning is, they say, between 80 and 90% of everything you learn. And that the direct hands-on experiences you can see is the lightest blue color. And then secondary experiences when you're listening to a person talk or give you information or something directly to you. But they're the intermediary. They're not the direct person giving it. So that's one of the reasons we talk about making sure that the student has lots of experiences. And so think about that in terms of children with typical vision and hearing. And now let's look at that. It gets turned upside down for children with deafblindness and significant multiple disabilities. And that is, it is essential. And the most effective type of teaching is when you are directly involved, when the child's directly involved with the materials, when the child's directly involved with you, when the child's directly involved with other people or the environment. Secondary is difficult, but possible. And incidental usually does not occur for most of those students. They don't learn things incidentally by just picking it up because their vision and their hearing is impacted. And for many of our students, it's more than that. There may be some intellectual problems, there may be physical problems. So keep in mind that we're thinking about that as we're talking about the idea of being a bridge. And feel free to write any comments or questions. I like comments too. Questions in the chat box, but also I'll leave some time at the end if y'all want to talk too. Some people think a deafblind person working with power tools, are you crazy? And here is a young deafblind man who is learning how to use power tools. Or can you be a bridge to learning? The concept development, the idea that the child will develop concepts which would lead them to have more understandings in this world. So think about the idea of how can you be a bridge? Will this young man get a job working with power tools? Probably not. But he now has the concept of it. He's touched the machinery. He knows that most of the machinery is made out of metal. He knows that he has to be very careful because it's very powerful. He knows that it vibrates. All the different concepts that come from just having that experience. Will, like I said, he's not going to necessarily work in this field, but he has the concepts. So we may be the barrier is the issue and not the bridge. Sometimes we don't let the student make choices or simple decisions. So I'd like you to think about a student that you work with and think about the number of choices or simple decision-making that student has in the time that he's with you, whether you're with him an hour a week, whether you're with him 6 hours a day, whether you're with him only once a month. How many choices and decisions does he get to make? That's a huge barrier. You may answer for him when someone else asks him a question. Maybe he is nonverbal and doesn't have a way to communicate. Right there is a red flag for me that I need to figure out a way for this child to communicate when other people are trying to ask him a question or interact with him. You may be picking up items that the student drops without even waiting for them to ask for help. And that's not unusual. To this day, when I'm in a classroom with a new student I'm meeting, we automatically do things like pick things up for other people. Someone's walking down the street and they drop something, and if I'm there, I reach down to pick up. I'm sure you do the same thing to help them pick it up. But does the child have a way to ask you to help him instead of you just automatically dropping down and picking it up? Sometimes we just don't provide information that is happening around him. And a really tricky question is, how much information do I provide and how much don't I? And I'll tell you a story about a woman who was an SSP, a service provider for a deafblind adult, and they went to the grocery store, and she was trying to give this person as many choices to make and making simple decisions. And so they got to the ice cream, and she said, well, they have French vanilla, they have, there's Breyers, there's Tillamook, there's this. And finally the woman like tapped her on the hand and said, stop, I want white ice cream, meaning you gave me way too much information, just give me vanilla. And so that was an interesting thing for me to think in terms of this adult had the opportunity to be able to say, look, you're giving me way too much information. Our children sometimes don't have a way to let you know, this is way too much information. So it's a very delicate balance. You have to know that student very well. And sometimes we don't provide exposure to new things. Who would have thought to provide exposure to Matthew for power tools? It wasn't like he was taking a class in it. But the intervener who was working with him said, we walked past that room and he hears the noises and he wants to know what it is. So here was the perfect opportunity for concept development for that student. Maybe we don't let him use his mobility skills to find something when he has dropped it. Maybe we move objects out of the way, such as a chair, so that they won't fall over it. Maybe we don't realize that socializing and communication is just as important as the activity itself. And sometimes we assume that the student is not interested in others because he doesn't show interest. Maybe he hasn't learned how to show interest. So here's some questions to ask yourself about being the bridge. Is this something the student can do independently, even if it might take a little longer? And for many of these students, it will always take longer. So don't go by your clock. You're going to go by their clock. If not, can that activity be modified so that the student can do it independently? Can I set the environment up? Can I put the materials out in a way that that child can learn the routine of it so that they can do it independently eventually? Is it something the student could do with a peer partner? Now that sounds like I'm making that just as easy as everything else, and it's not. Because not only do you need to work, you have to teach that peer partner how to be a partner. Is the adult support the only way the student can do this activity? And in some cases, the answer is yes. If yes, how can that adult support be made as invisible as possible? So areas in which we can serve as a bridge. Accessing information. We're the ones providing the information for that student so they know. Communication. Understanding concepts, which we talked about. Participating. Having as much independence as possible. Motivation. We want them to want to do it. How can we get them interested in it? How can they have an experience of it? Socialization, self-determination, and success. Those are all the areas in which we can serve as a bridge. And this is that part where I said to you, please don't think of yourself as a teacher right now. Think of yourself as a facilitator, as someone who is giving information or setting a routine up or arranging it so that that student can get information and can actually have a bridge. And many times we think about a bridge from one place to another, which we do. Sometimes we think of about a bridge as between two people. I'm going to get on the other side of that bridge so I can get to know that person. So what's the bridge for me to do that? So a bridge to learning is an important piece. And this adult is trying to make sure that this student has as much information as possible to become the bridge so that they can make their own experience book in this case. So they had taken pictures of this student having the experience. And then what the adult had arranged was that they were going to make the book together. This student has some vision, but once they had these pictures there, they were also going to attach a tactile thing that would remind the child of that picture that represents that part of the experience. And you will not see that in this. But she does not have vision that is good enough to see this. This picture is there as a reminder that's associated with the tactile symbol, so that then she can read the book with others. If only the tactile symbol was there, then she wouldn't have the opportunity to necessarily share it with children her own age, because maybe she wouldn't be able to read the words that are on the page. So let's go ahead, and hopefully this is going to work. It worked when Maritas and I tried it.
Here's our paper, nice and thick. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Put your hand under mine. Let me show you. Ready? Here we go. Squeeze. Got to get that glue on there. Squeeze. Hang on. Here we go. Push. 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 Now we just have to let our book dry. And then we'll put rings in it. You can help me do that after it dries. All done. All done. All done.
So in that situation, what Robin was trying to do was trying to build the experience and have a way to remember the experience and to share the experience. So some of the things, I'm going to go back a couple slides. So one of the things she wanted to do was to make sure that, whoops, I'm not on the right one, just a second. Okay, so let's go back to the ideas of being a barrier. So in this case, the child was not making many choices. It was not about that. It was about them creating something together so that the memory of it, because so many times with our students, people say, well, I don't know what he remembers, or he remembers the strangest things. And it's like, we want him to have a memory of it. And there are different ways to do that. This happens to be in the form of an experience book. But there's another way to do a bridge. And there's a story of a dad and his little girl, and she was in the stroller, and they went up on the hill in the park. And he said that now we're going to go down the hill. So they started going down the hill faster and faster. And he's yelling in her ear, wee, wee, wee. And they get to the bottom of the hill and they go back up the hill and they do it again. And he does it the same way. So they did that 4 or 5 times and then they went home. And that night when she was ready for bed, they were sitting on her bed and he said, wee, wee, wee. And her head picked up. And he said, and then what he tried to do was he tried to give her the motion in bed. Do you remember how it was? Like it was rocking. The stroller was rocking and we were moving. And he whooshed past her so she could feel the wind. He had a legal pad and he whooshed it past her head so she could feel the wind. And all of a sudden this big smile came. And again, they would do that on different days. And eventually, and this was a child who was not verbal at that point. However, the E sound in we is one of the more, one of the sounds that you can hear. Many of our students can hear the E sound, some of those vowels, the frequency at which they occur. And so one of the things that happened was over a course of a couple months, they got to the park and they started going up the hill and she's going, E, E, E. Her dad built a bridge, made that bridge of that E so that they could share that and she would be able to anticipate and she would know what's happening. So that at home, maybe the next day, I don't know, but at home, one day she went, her dad got home from work and she said, E, E. And he said, oh, you want to go to the park. Okay, let's go. So they went. So that's that piece about she finally could make a choice and say, I want to go to the park and I want to go do that thing that goes down the hill that way. So those are some of the things that as you're thinking about how you be a bridge, it's not just about being a bridge by making an experience book, which is a very good way to do it. However, it may be that this child's not ready for an experience book. Or maybe the dad never thought of it, and that's okay too. He found another way to be a bridge for that student. He wasn't teaching her, now we're going to go up the hill. But what he did share with us is that after that happened, he started putting other sounds with different parts of that experience. To the point that 6 to 8 months later, she was doing things like, that's the car revving up. That was her rendition. So that she could say, this is what we're going to do. I've got a routine down and I know them by the noises. And she could make those noises. She was not using spoken language. So again, that whole idea of how to be a bridge. And in the case of Robin with the student making the experience book, that's one form of a bridge. The father was a form of a bridge. An intervener might be doing something in which she becomes the bridge for the child for sitting next to the student who has no disabilities in the classroom, but they make a connection. How do you become a bridge if the student's going to an after-school activity like a knitting club? How do you become the bridge instead of just the teacher who's one-on-one teaching her how to knit? Instead of what is part of the enjoyment of knitting is sometimes doing it alone. But sometimes it's about doing it with a group of friends or one friend that we get together. That idea of being the bridge. Without that bridge, that student with multiple disabilities and deafblindness cannot make that jump. They have to have someone who's giving them information to slowly walk over that bridge to accomplish whatever it is that's on the other side. It's one of the things that it's why it's so very important that you know your students' likes and dislikes, because you have a much better chance of coming up with activities and exposure to new things, which is the last one on this list, when you know what they like and don't like. It's just as important to know what they don't like. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to look at this video, and I want you to just jot down on a piece of paper that you have there, what are some of your ideas of how that adult is being a bridge for that child? And I'm going to ask you when we get to the end of it for you all to type in the chat box just an idea that you have of one way that person is serving as a bridge. He says, I don't know if he likes it. Okay, so if you would please type in the chat box some of the things that you saw, ways in which this adult served as a bridge. She started by being a comfort or a safety net in the way she held him. This was his first time to go to the water park, so he needed that. Moved at his pace. Oh man, that is such an important one. Didn't force him into the water. Helping him, shared the water with him on his hands and feet. Did you notice that when she got his feet involved, his hand automatically came out to find? And for some children, their feet are better than their hands in the beginning. They will tolerate things on their feet that they will not tolerate on their hands. And that slowly they make that transition. Very slow introduction versus jumping right in. How many of you, and I'm gonna cop to being one of them, how many of you sat there and said, well, go ahead, start doing something with them? And that's part of it. It's that whole idea that you have to go at the child's pace and you want to go slowly, because that's what helps. A bridge doesn't get built in a day. A bridge takes a while to build, and you have to build it slowly to make sure it's right. She helped him touch the little friend with the hands and the feet. Used hand over hand and underhand. So she has a 1.5 year relationship with this child. So there was a lot of trust there. In the beginning, I never use hand over hand unless I'm trying to save a child from getting hurt. Otherwise, I don't, because I want us to have a relationship before I might touch over his hands to show him how something works. Relied on listening first, and her arms were a shield, then gradually opened up. Nice observation. Provided adequate physical support so that he didn't have to worry about how to support his body and he could focus on the fun of the activity. That's a great one. That whole idea of if I'm positioned in a good position, then I can pay attention to the activity. I don't have to worry about, am I going to fall over? Do I have to put my left arm down because I might fall over and hit the ground, etc. All of these, and I'm not sure that I got everyone, so I'm just looking back because your ideas are great. Yeah, so helping him touch that other child. And he really got into the idea of touching the other child once he knew that it was a person. So this is a child who would suggest to me, just watching this video, which is only one very small picture of this child, is that he's probably interested in people. And then she guided him to the water, and then the feeling of the grate where the water comes out. She helped him understand why the water wasn't coming out when his peer blocked it. Yeah, she was taking him down to say, look, this is what happens. I'm just looking at all your comments. Helping him to be near and not in the water. That's that environmental. She's building an environmental bridge too. I can't think of a time I've watched somebody building a bridge for the child that there wasn't an environment involved as well as the activity. And something, did you notice one thing she did very little of? And if you did, would you type it in? Yes, thank you, Nancy. Talking, yes, Alyssa, yeah, you all got it. She did not talk very much. And the reason she didn't was, number one, he has a pretty significant hearing loss. So, and then all that background noise of the water, but also she has an interesting way of exposing a child to a new experience. And she tries to let them experience it tactily, sensorially, in any way they want, instead of her starting to talk about it. And let me tell you that this is called water, and this is a grate, and it's made of metal, and this is the concrete, and feel how wet it is, and all those things. There's time to do that. But this was the first experience, and she wanted him to have the experience instead of having somebody mediate the experience through words, which she did not feel that he would necessarily hear her anyway. But sometimes we just talk for ourselves too, or we talk when somebody else is there. Those are all, I think this video for me has a great deal of meaning, and I could see that you all saw many of the same things I saw. And that whole idea of building, you know, be a bridge for that child to a new experience. That was for him. Being a bridge from the child to another child. Here's somebody else just like you. They have arms, legs, they have skin, they feel like you. Does he know that that was a little girl? No, that was not the issue. The issue was, let me have you see and feel what this is like. Any other comments that people would like to make that I didn't ask questions about? Okay, so I want to, most of you may be already familiar with the OHOA, OHOA, which is Open Hands, Open Access modules that are done through NCDB, National Center for Deafblindness. There is a module and it's module 11, that you can go to. And I think you have to register. I think you have to sign up to be able to get into these, but it's free. It won't cost you anything. But module 11 has several videos in it that I would recommend that you take a look at. And one is Matthew, the young man who was at the Power Tools, was in Arlington Cemetery. And he was trying to understand what that cemetery would be like. Have any of you ever been to Arlington Cemetery in Washington? I went there maybe, whoops, maybe two, oh good, Alyssa, you've been there. So for me, part of it was the issue that it was so, it just went on forever and ever and ever. And please add your comments for those of you who've been there. And this, this intervener was trying to give him an idea of how many crosses there are in Arlington Cemetery, that they just go on and on and on and on. I was overwhelmed by it when I saw it maybe about 15 years ago. So, you know, how do you make sure he has all of that understanding? You don't. What you do is you expose in a way that you can, and in a way that he or she will understand. And then you let it go. And it might be that it would come up again. Maybe they will have made a fairly extensive experience book about it. And maybe that intervener took pictures, not so that Matt could see them, because Matt wouldn't be able to see them, but so that he would have something to share with other people and talk to other people about it. So I'm going to ask another question, and I hope you all will participate as great as you have. And that is, think about a student that you work with, and think about an experience you would like them to have that you think they haven't had yet, and something that you could do with them. And type that in. Grass in the yard, communicating with the switch. So Kendra, one of the things that I would ask you is, what is it that you think he would want to communicate that he would need a switch? Doing an art project. Can you think, Nancy, can you think of the materials you might want to do? What is the art project you want them to do? Sun on your face and feeling the warmth.
It's like when a kid goes missing or something.
Sitting in a preschool with other kids around. Gluing. Okay, Nancy's coming back with, well, we need glue and paper and tissue, perhaps different kinds of tactile pieces. So Sherry, I'm thinking sitting in a preschool with other kids around. Has that child even had an experience of being in a preschool room without other children, so that they can start to learn that environment and then add the kids? Or do you add the kids out on the playground and then they go into the school with them? Those are some of the things that you want to think about, is how are you the bridge? How do you help that happen? And Sherry, yeah, he's not had that experience at all. So he hasn't been to a preschool and he hasn't been there with other kids. So you may want to break that down into a couple different steps. Playing music with other kids. She loves bells. Okay, so now we have a like Jennifer is sharing with us. So the idea of playing music. So what can she do? Maybe, and I'm just going to make this up because I don't know your student, Jennifer. Maybe Jennifer's student doesn't have good use of her hands. So where else could the bells be? Could they be around her ankles? Could they be around her upper arm because she moves her shoulder? So you start thinking about, well, what part of the body would work better for that child, maybe? And then do you ask the teacher or do you provide a bunch of bells for the kids to make, to use pipe cleaners and weave them in and out of 3 or 4 different bells, and then they all get to do the bells. And then later you start thinking about, oh, well, we could do 1 bell shake, then 2 bell shakes, then 1 bell shake, then 2 bell shake, then 1 bell shake. So now you're doing the ABAB pattern for math. So those are some of the things you start thinking about. Leslie's talking about meaningful participation in the peers PE class. So meaningful is the operative word there. What skills does that child already have that he could use with the other students in the activity? Now, this is that part where you say, okay, maybe I can talk to so this is another way you can serve as being a bridge. You can actually talk to the PE teacher and say, okay, these are the 2 movements my student has. He could be with a peer, and the peer could be his eyes, as long as we teach the peer. And if the peer wants to do it. Sometimes PE is a tough one to do because the kids all want to run around and do their own thing. So you think about that environment. What can I change about the environment? What were those 5 questions we asked about? Have you checked out the PE books available through APH? There was also a training a year ago that I can share more info if you're interested. I'd love to know about that, Leslie, because I think sometimes teachers, PE teachers, if you give them some ideas, they can figure out a way to do it. It's just they don't have the background that you have. So sometimes you serve as a bridge by talking to the person who's running the activity. Sometimes if you're running the activity, then you just talk to yourself. Any other thoughts? So now I would like you to think about you being a bridge with the student you're thinking about. So think about that student and think, based on some of the stuff we've talked about today, what would you like to be a bridge for that student? How would you like to be a bridge for that student? And you can make it very minute. It can be one simple thing that you're going to do. It doesn't have to be changing their whole educational program. That's not what this is about. And it might be that you want to do more of something you already are doing. Doesn't always have to be something new. Or how would you like to communicate that to the paraeducator who works with the student or the teacher who works with the student of a way to be a bridge? Yeah, Leslie, getting the buy-in from other people is the important thing. When you're not the teacher, when you're not the one that's in there all day long, you have to convince, you have to be a cheerleader for that child. So some of the questions is, what I would ask you is, can you move from one of these questions to a less confining question? And working with birth to 3, Get ideas from parents by asking these same questions, then implementing. Good. I think your visuals of learning could be shared with teachers to understand that these kids, oops, I just lost it, that these kids have to be taught differently. Yes, and I am sending this to Maritas for her to send out this. But if you are interested, and that's going to be in a PDF, so you'll have to show the whole thing to people or whatever. But if for some reason you want those slides, if you would get from Maritas my email, I would be happy to send those to you so that you could input those into other things or just print them out. It would be hard to do in the PDF form that it's going to be. I think making them aware of the wait time and not being in a hurry to assume meaning, right? And then think of the routines that you're doing with your students. Are there some places that you could be a bridge to a little bit more independence? Could I just delay my hand doing something and waiting to see if they start to move, because they can then show me that they know what's next. They just can't do it themselves. The idea of turning a doorknob, you know, a lot of us are used to the old-fashioned doorknob. It's round, but now they have the ones where all you do is push down. It's a much simpler, as long as it doesn't take too much strength, it's a much simpler thing to teach students, especially if you use your hand under their hand. So that's another bridge. And then if their hand is on top of mine and we're doing something, maybe if I pull my hand back just slightly so that more of their fingers are actually touching the thing we're exploring or that we're doing. And that slowly, maybe my hand starts to bend down and curl. So I'm going to get out of this so I can just, let's see here. Okay, and show. Stop share. Okay, so in this case, one of the things I would do is if I'm working hand under hand, and then I slowly move out and maybe bend my fingers down, that they're doing more of the work so that they develop the confidence that they're more capable than what they think they are. Because as long as you do for me exactly the same thing you've done every time, I don't have to do anything. But if I go ahead in and I start pulling back and they're touching it more, they're feeling it more, they're able to touch it, or they're able to push down to get the doorknob open, whatever it is you're working on, those are the things that they go, whoa, I can do this. What a surprise. This is cool. I can actually do this. So think in those terms too. How do you serve as a bridge to leave them be more independent? Anything you can get away with not doing, and slowly, just like we saw the young woman with the little boy, the whole piece of that was how slowly she did something. And we think we're doing it slowly, but we are not. If somebody videotaped us and we look at it, we go, oh, I thought I was much slower than that. I had to do this for a class where we had to do something, they videotaped, and it was all about weight. And I even knew what the topic was. And I could not believe how much faster I did it than what my head thought I was doing it. So it's videotaping is wonderful. Because you can have somebody videotape you and then you can see, am I really doing what I think I'm doing? And am I doing it at the pace I think I'm doing it? And that pace is absolutely crucial to the idea of being a bridge. You have to do it slowly enough for them to develop the confidence that they can do it. A bridge is there only to get you to the other side. Then when you're there, you're on your own. And that's the idea of you're there to make that bridge, and then you're there to pull away. And it's one of the reasons I think when I was training zillions of years ago, everything was you're going to teach. It was the idea that, tabula rasa, the child was a blank slate and you wrote on him and everything. And the more time you spend working with kids, the more you know that's bunk. There is no tabula rasa. They come with their own stuff and it's okay. It's good. You use that stuff. Things change, and I wish we all weren't as attached to the concept of a teacher or our concept or the public's concept. All the parents of all our kids all went to school. They all think they know what a teacher is. And that's not true. Teachers are so different. One from the next are so different from each other. And some are more facilitating and coaching, and others are more directive. And there are children that do better with a more directive person, but eventually you have to be able to know when to stop the direction and let them direct themselves.